Hey guys, Cher here, and we're finally starting this day of the week's topic or theme, which is books. So I've been wanting to do book reviews for a while, but I just couldn't find a book really to talk about because either I wasn't really motivated to talk about it or it was not good enough for me to talk about or wasn't worth my time talking about. But then, over 2 months ago, I got a book in the mail with courtesy of Goodreads because I entered a giveaway and I turned out to be one of the lucky winners of receiving this book. And what makes this book unique as far as this giveaway is concerned is that officially the book has not been published yet. So I was, technically speaking, one of the first people to get a sneak peek into what this book has to offer. And I thought it would be a really nice return if I gave it a review of sorts to help the public purchase or decide on purchasing this book as it comes out this April. And that book is called Swimming Between Worlds by Elaine Neal Orr. I hope I pronounced that name right. So before I can really get down to the root of why I like this book so much, since this book is new, I should discuss what it's about. So basically, this book takes place in 1960. It's during the Civil Rights Movement, and it takes place in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, which, of course, if we're talking about Civil Rights Movement period, it was one of those places that was deemed, or at least how this book represents it, it was very, very strict on segregation, and it was not only, like, the law that, or, like, law enforcement that takes action with it, it was its people that wanted it to stay that way. And this, or the two towns, Winston-Salem is like the area of it, that was one of those towns that really took the Jim Crow laws to the level of evilness that we've seen with Martin Luther King, like, specials and stuff like that. And with this book, there are 3 characters in this book. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the back of this because I only remember, like, one of the names, or at least I know all of them, but there are some names that are just, like, they're so weird that I can't remember it. The 3 characters are Tacker, Cait, and Gaines. Tacker and Cait are white, and they were not exactly childhood friends, but they've known of each other. But they come together because of one person, and that's Gaines, and he's African American, and he was the one who shows these two, like, yeah, like, it's really, really bad here, and even if white people try to change anything, the other white people are not, because the segregation is really at its peak in this time period. Like, even though slavery was over, like, decades or centuries ago, it's still that bad in Winston-Salem, or especially, like, the southern area of the United States. It's pretty fucking ugly. So the first thing I wanted to talk about with this book was how the author managed to create the tone for the setting. And as I mentioned before, yeah, the stakes are pretty high. Even though this book is, like, I consider it more of a slice of life drama than, like, a civil rights movement piece. I mean, trust me, there are still, like, civil rights propaganda in this book. Like, this wouldn't exist if Elaine didn't put something about the civil rights movement and its events in this book. but it's more focusing on the lives of the three characters rather than them kind of trying to change how things work. Oh, trust me, like, Tacker, the white male lead in this book, he ended up going on some internship or missionary thing to Nigeria, and that helped him understand that everyone is a person and we should all be equal. That's where he started, like, supporting the civil rights movement, even though the rest of American society pretty much sucks cock in this case. And then there's Cait, who basically grew up in this white neighborhood all her life, so she didn't really have to worry much about the diverse population. That is until she starts going into the city. It's like at first that she's scared of them, but then because of Tacker, she learns to make friends with them. But I'll get to characters when I get to characters. The tone is very interesting because there are points where it would just focus like on daily lives on mostly Tacker and Cait because that's where the story mostly surrounds. But then when Tacker and Cait like learn about Gaines's personal life, especially how he has to make money in order to provide for his family, especially his little sister, they learn that yeah, his life is pretty much shit because of the white population. I mean, considering this is like during the time of the civil rights movement, or even before that, we knew that was a thing. Like, we knew, but no one would do a thing about it. It's like they wanted to keep the divide, but then the divide is more obvious once these Tacker and Cait start exploring what the African American or Black American community had to suffer with every single fucking day of their lives. So as I was reading this, even I didn't like. It tries to add like a comfortable like slice of life vibe, but because this is a civil rights movement book, it doesn't give you that comfort that much. Like, reading this, I wanted to know what was going to happen to these characters, especially Tacker, since he was for the civil rights movement as a white person. Of course, he's going to get a lot of bullshit from his town, especially since he's trying to help Gaines out. Like, he's been called the N-word, he's been called the F-word, he's been called a lot of things because of the decisions he's making. But of course, as we're reading this, we're praising Tacker for what he's doing because he doesn't stand down for anybody, just like how Gaines doesn't stand down for anything, and we praise him for it. Now that we're on, like, the topic of characters, Tacker and Gaines are my two favorites because I love their conversations, I love their friendship, I love what they stand for, and I love how they're very strong-willed, and that even when all this shit comes piling up on them, I mean, they could have reformed to the ways of society, meaning, oh, blacks and whites are two different classes of people, whites on top, blacks on bottom. They could have done that, but no, they decided not to do that. They decided, fuck the system, because what's the point of living if you're not fighting for something? And that's exactly what these two characters do. As for Cait, though, she is just as bland as a bowl of porridge without any fruit or cinnamon in it. Like, I mean, I get it. Like, like the book stated, like, she was the one who grew up in a society where she didn't have to worry about these conflicts. But the fact that she is hanging out with Tacker and Gaines so much, I thought that she would, like, say something, but no, it's morally focused on, like, how her boyfriend from this medical school is causing drama, and then it's drama with, like, the death of her parents, and, like, something about, like, getting fortune to their estate or something like that. It's something so boring. Like, her story is just boring, and it makes me want to move on to Tacker and Gaines already, because I think that's what the story mostly is occurring around. It's occurring around those two. Not much around Cait, even though, like, she does gain, like, a little bit more relevance, but I found that I think she gained relevance a little too late into the book. But that's just my personal opinion. For those of you who have gotten this book already and you disagree, or if you read this by the time April comes and you disagree with me, that's fine. Like, we all don't need to have the same opinions here. I just want to go back to setting really quickly, because when it comes to the setting, there are kind of two settings. There's Winston-Salem, Carolina, which the story mostly takes place in the present, but then there's Nigeria, where Tacker's flashbacks take place. And I don't think I could have come up with two better locations for this story to take place, because, well, Nigeria is one of those countries where we know best about where African culture came from. I mean, there are other countries too. I guess we're like more associated with Nigeria, especially since Nigeria can speak like a couple different languages, how it was taken over by multiple empires and colonies back in the olden days. And then I like Winston-Salem because, as I mentioned before, when we're talking about like where the civil rights movement was most needed, it was definitely those states in the South, those cities in the South, that definitely show us that the situation between white and blacks is awful. It's goddamn awful. Like, this book is not clean when it comes to, like, the amount of violence that's in here. Like, this book describes people getting beat up. They describe people spitting into other people's faces. It's disgusting, but it's realistic, and I love how realistic that this author goes into talking about this subject. Like, everything about this book, when it comes to detail, is perfect. And I am a person for detail. If you are the same, I highly recommend that you read about this, especially if you're a person who's really interested in civil rights, especially even in modern day. Speaking of which, this book is definitely perfect to read for our modern day situation right now. I don't know if I'm just being ignorant or anything like that. I don't know how often we get books about how the white allies in the civil rights movement have to deal with the bull crap that Tacker had to deal with in this book. Because when I hear like civil rights movement stories, it's mostly from the one other race's point of view. And it makes sense, because the civil rights movement would not exist if this issue of white and black people being equal did not come up. I like this because it does show that there are people who are on the other side who some people might think, oh, they don't care about all Black Lives Matter. They're just like, oh, all lives matter, but they just don't care. They just throw it out there because they're like, it's supposed to be true, but they're like, it's like they don't want to get involved with why Black lives should matter. This book shows that there are people who are dedicated enough to create change in society when society gets really, really bad and it gets really, really ugly and really, really violent. And except for that, like, one character who's just a slice of bread, I rate this book really, really high. Like, I wouldn't call it a 10 per se because there are some flaws. Like, but they're very minor flaws. Like, Cait as a character being one of them. But I would say this book is a perfect 9 out of 10. Like, I highly recommend this if you're a history or even a civil rights movement or just a slice of life buff. This book is definitely for you. Like I said, it's called Swimming Between Worlds, and it comes out in April of this year. So if you find it in any bookstore, if you find it on your Kindles or your Nooks or any other reading app, if it's on Audible, like wherever you can find it, I highly suggest that you get it or at least pre-order it. It's totally worth your money, and you will not regret reading this. So I hope you guys liked this little book review, and if you liked it, make sure you hit the like button, and you can check out some of my other content below. I'm Cait, and it's been real. Ciao!